I believe Schopenhauer is one of the most underrated philosophers ever. And we don't talk about his main work as much as we should. Whenever he is brought into discussion, they analyze his quotes regarding women mostly, or life in general. And in these quotes, they emphasize his pessimistic nature and also his humor, because he was a funny guy, believe it or not, even though he used to be a pessimist. However, his main work is his biggest contribution to the philosophy, and it's called The World as Will and Representation. And it's a very big book. When I read it in French about 80 years ago, it was approximately 2,000 pages, to which he added about 500 during his whole life. So he wrote it in his late 20s, which is extremely rare, and he just perfected his work during all his life. He never changed his opinion. He didn't have phases. He just went straight to the point since he was young and never strayed away. I don't know if that's good or bad, and that might make him a firm believer, but he had his strong convictions. So basically, this book is called this way because he views the world as a certain universe that has its source, and this power needs to be activated, so to speak, and to live and create and manifest itself. And that's why it's called will. You might use the word God if you want, but not in a religious sense, but in a universal way, like, or the universe, or just a vibration. That's neither bad nor good, and it isn't enclosed by time. And this source struggles, so to speak, and when the human appears, the existence as we see it also is created simultaneously. In this way, he is an idealist. Not because he has some ideals, but because he views the world as Plato viewed it, as something whose source is in some idea, and that we impose on the world our framework. Now, to understand him deeper, we must dig a little bit at his influences, and his biggest one is the philosopher Kant, and especially the critique of pure rationality, or something like that. I haven't read it in English, so my translation might be approximate. But I'm sure that if you are accustomed with his thinking, then you must know its direct established name in English. And he thought that the human brain has some sort of forms, especially those that concern causality and time. Of course, there are approximately 12, or at least that was his number. It is debatable. Even Schopenhauer put it under question, but it doesn't matter. The most important categories, as I say, is time, causality, and matter too. And that there must be a thing in itself which we are not able to perceive, because we are always limited by our forms ingrained in our brain. And that's his huge difference as opposed to Hume, who thought that we only create these categories by experience. But Kant said that no, you don't need experience in order to fathom them. They are an inextricable part of our brain. Now, the difference between Kant and Schopenhauer, the huge one, is that he doesn't believe in the thing in itself, Schopenhauer, and he says that it doesn't exist, and even the world as we see it is a direct consequence of our interpretation. That doesn't mean that there is no kind of objective truth, but the world in this three-dimensional way exists only because we are able to view it and to impose on this, And I also doesn't forgot to mention that space is also one of those main categories or forms. And he blends this way of thinking with Buddhism that says that everything is futile and that there is no point in pursuing anything. And one of the most used words in the world as will and representation is illusion, referring to the fact that we are mainly chasing chimeras in this life. Now, even though he starts and names his work will and representation, and the kind of order is will then representation, he begins by and explains his theory by the representation, because that's the part to which we are mostly accustomed to. And by representation we mean what is what appears in front of us, and which later, it also had the name, but we might also call it a phenomenon. Kant called it a phenomenon too. Then Hegel used the word and then it was perpetuated by Schopenhauer and afterwards Husserl, but that's another story. So he marries these two concepts and says that the veil of Maya, to use Buddhist terms, is a product of our thinking. And it's a very long book, as I said, and he has a lot of cool ideas, and they are also imbued with some irony and humor. And he makes the connection of the experience and points out at in some place that his philosophy is not boring and dry, because he always makes the connection with the experience, and that's true. It's one of the most interesting books. If for example you read Kant, there is no feeling there. He's extremely analytical, but Schopenhauer manages to combine the two, and he's both entertaining, to use a term that circulates these days, and also very deep. And so this will makes us to pursue things, and the biggest of all is to procreate. And he says that even though most of us understand that we are getting into trouble, mostly, we still cannot resist it, because most of the time it's stronger than us. It's the will of the species, not of the individual. And often we marry and call it love when it's just a chemical reaction, an instinct that forces us to procreate, even though we might get disappointed after half a year and regret our decision. So that's in short. He also states that one of the ways in which we can understand this is the fact that we can describe how the world behaves by using some formulas, which are an invention of our brain, but we still can do it. And he says that the laws of nature are a sort of bridge between the will in its ideal form and the world as you see it in the phenomenological sense. And so it kind of starts from this source, which is atemporal and doesn't have a place, and it begins to materialize, in these laws, from which, or by in virtue of them, the world begins to function, and that space and time are correlated, and that they are the prerequisites that make our experience possible, because we attribute to each event a place in time and space, and they are like correlated, They intermingle and they cross each other. And that's how we are able to separate the infinite amount of information that's thrown at us. And this information does not obey the laws of causality. We are able to see only the part which obeys these laws, but that's not all of it, and we will never be able to apprehend it. Which is why he says that this world, as we perceive it, is a product of our mental abilities, and it is created and killed simultaneously, and it will disappear when the last human dies. Let me see how much battery I have left. Whatever. I didn't have enough. I think that will be the first part, and yes, and it will exist when the last human will die. It doesn't mean that God will disappear or the will, but the phenomenological slice, so to put it, of that infinite vibration, and these are not his words, I'm using like some terms that might make you help to understand, will vanish. And that's very cool. I could talk about it a lot. Another thing that I might add is that among his influences, Schopenhauer cites Descartes, who was the first, or one of the first, actually the first, who doubted his own existence, and that what he sees might be the product of some devil. Has the quote that I think, therefore I am. And it might sound crazy at first, but that's extremely deep when you think of it. He changed the direction in which the philosophy was directed, was going. Sorry. And yeah, there's a lot to talk about now, but he starts with the representation and explains how all this thing goes, and then he kind of goes to the will in the second part. But actually they work backwards, and that's why it's called the world as will and representation. I have a lot to talk about here, but I'll put an end now, and perhaps I'll make part 2 if someone likes it, or when I feel like it, and because I'm very passionate regarding this topic. So anyway, have a nice day.